Welcome to the Fee for Service Dentist Podcast. Dr. Sonny Spiro. Today's guest, Dr. Ben Burkit's an old friend with a ton of information. And Ben has written his book that we talked to him about and encouraged him, but he was determined. He knew he was going to write it. We just gave him a little nudge. That's all. The Dropping Dental PPO's Playbook. It's going to be available on Amazon. It's printed copy. Ben also is available if you want him to look over your numbers and give you a consulted service in helping you, see yourself steer from the forest from the trees. So take advantage of that. As always, our podcast brought to you by Kettenbach Dental. Kettenbach is excited to announce a first major advancement in fluoride varnish treatment. It's called Prophycel. No longer any alcohol or resin. Instead, patients will feel their new treatment delivered in a muco-adhesive dimethicone gel. Try saying that 3 times fast. Leaving a smooth, silky, lubricious feel. No more grit. Contact Kettenbach today for more details. Call 877-532-2123 or visit KettenbachUSA.com.
My name is Drew Burns, and I'm a part of a small group of dentists who believe something crazy. We believe that the standard of care is just not good enough. We demand the best of ourselves and the best for our patients. We believe that the best way? No, the only way to practice dentistry is on our own terms. If you ask the dental consultants or the corporate CEOs, they tell you that what we're doing isn't smart, that fee-for-service dentistry is dead, and that the golden age of dentistry is over. Yet, while others focus on profits first, we focus on the patient first. And yet our offices are some of the most profitable in the entire country because we invest in ourselves and we are doing things right. It's our name on the door and it's our reputation on the line. My name is Drew Burns and I am a fee-for-service dentist. This is the Fee-for-Service Dentist Podcast and these are our stories.
Welcome to the Fee-for-Service Dentist Podcast. Dr. Sonny Spiro. Today's our guest, an old friend, Dr. Ben Burkit. We've had him on a few times and he's talked a lot about the math and the statistics and the numbers behind getting out of dental PPOs and insurance plans. And if you remember, I did encourage Ben to write a book.
Tiny little.
I did encourage him.
Yeah.
And he did write that book, and it's called the Dropping Dental PPO Playbook. And if you're watching it, you can see him holding it up. Yeah. It's going to be available on Amazon print version, November 14th. And welcome, Ben. Looking forward to this.
Thank you. Yeah, I attempted to write a book a few times before and kind of got stuck a few times. But honestly, the Fee-for-Service Facebook group helped a lot with this because when I posted graphs and I got feedback, and questions or people push back on certain ideas, and even some of our, podcasts and our conversations, that kind of changed what was in the book to kind of make it, I feel like, more coherent, more comprehensive, because I've been working on these ideas off and on for quite a while, but to kind of make it in a manageable, understandable kind of manner was a bit of work. But I feel like I got there. I'm happy with the end result, and I'm excited for this to come out. Publishing a book is difficult. There's a lot of editing, formatting, and headaches, but I got through it, and it should be out on the 14th.
If you guys know Ben, you know that I'm sure every detail was meticulously cared for and very well thought out. He's a very thoughtful young man. So, and I feel I can say that because I'm a little bit older, so I can say young man. Don't take offense. Gotcha. Very thoughtful, well thought out young man who really puts his heart and soul into it. And the other beautiful thing is you believe this. This is authentic to you.
Oh, I'm in it. I'm in it too. I'm
exactly.
I'm not 100% fee for service yet. I know from our previous podcast, we talked, I was a network with just about everything. I was under Connection Dental and a bunch of the big names, Cigna, MetLife, Delta. And I've been able to filter out a very large portion of that, not 100% there yet. I follow, I eat my own cooking, so I follow my own methods and determine when to drop a PPO based on my own math, my own logic. I know the emotions of dropping a plan and seeing this schedule get lighter, and some of the fears and anxieties to go with that. But luckily, because I have my own charts and stuff, I can lean back and be like, all right, schedule's a little slower, but collections are up 5-10%. I'm okay with that. Oh, I have to leave at 4 o'clock instead of 5. Oh, that's really not terrible. I'm still making the same amount. Like that, oh, we're going to do long lunch today. Oh, let's do a team training. Or let's just take everyone out for a 2-hour lunch to kind of build up camaraderie, because the schedule's lighter. And like, well, collections are the same because we're not writing off what we used to. And so that's not always a bad thing to have, where you don't feel like you're on a hamster wheel. I don't know if some of us like crave that because they get so used to it. But when you writing off half your fee, you could see half the patients and still do just fine.
Yep. So we're going to talk about some real examples, and Ben has we'll call it a real example. It's an amalgamation of about 4 or 5 people who reached out to Ben where he did some analysis for them. And we're going to go through that in a little bit more detail. But let's start out with, and we were talking a little bit before on the show, was why. Let's talk about why drop insurance. So,
I mean, there's obviously the financial incentive for the doctor, being kind of in with these insurance plans. If you're writing off 30, 40, 50, even I've seen 50+%, there's obviously a clear financial incentive for that. But, money's great. I'm not going to say, it's not useful. It's not a tool in your life for either retirement, but it's also like, how can you support your team? What additional CE can you do? How can you make these, with a lighter schedule, I can make my appointments 10, 15 minutes longer, get into what my patients know, want, and need about their mouth, and have a better long-term outcome. So my office, I do see a lot of kids. I'm a general dentist, but I do have a reputation for being great with the kids. And, part of my mission is to help raise a generation of kids who aren't terrified of the dentist. We'll get a lot of kids had a bad experience someplace else. I do offer some sedation options. We fix them up. I've seen some like kind of heartwarming things where like some kid, they were going to the dentist for 2-3 years, multiple pain abscess, but they never complained about it. And they weren't gaining weight. They weren't, developing like they should. And after, we fixed them up, all of a sudden they're not in pain anymore because that was their baseline was pain. And they just didn't know how to communicate it. I'm talking about a 5-6-year-old, not, like a teenager. And then all of a sudden they get to the appropriate weight because they were avoiding food, particular like harder foods, the vegetables and whatnot. But in order for me to offer that service and be as comprehensive as I want to be, I have to have the appropriate amount of time. My staff has to have the appropriate amount of time. If I have downtime between patients, I can go up and look up an article. I can, take an online course to try and expand my skill set, and not worry about, can I pay rent this month? Because I have that additional flexibility. And obviously there are things like getting out of debt, supporting your retirement, bonuses for team, and just that sense of security, like you have a little bit of a cushion to sit on. And then nothing I like about it because
other than the financial part, what are some of the issues that you're going to talk to the patients about? I mean, I find sometimes if you talk about the finances, patients tune you right out because you're the rich doctor, no matter what you say. Versus, hey, this is a quality of care issue. This is a me and you issue where we have someone else making your decisions that may or may not have your best interest. And that's who that I now have to deal with because I am contracted with that insurance company. Yeah. How do you talk about that part of it?
So, if you're contracted with certain insurance companies, it might be funneling you into doing a procedure a certain way so that you can maintain profitability with it, or, with, co-pays or anything, can't you just fill it, doc, instead of, this should be a crown. I remember I had a guy come in, he had a big MOD on a premolar, lingual cost completely broken off. He's just like, well, just fill it. I'm like, I can't fill it. I know you think filling is going to solve your problem, but the crown is going to be the right solution here. She's like, he's worried about coverage and all these other things. I'm like, I'm not going to do patchwork dentistry. I'm not going to do something that I feel is going to fail you in 3 months. And then you're going to come back, mad at me. I want to be able to do something upfront, comprehensive, talk about your needs and be able to do it in a way that, it's going to last you. You want a tooth. You don't want a filling. You want a tooth you can chew on is really the, we kind of sell a service, but they're buying an end result, the patient are, and they want to be able to smile. They want to be able to chew. They want to be out of pain. That's what a patient's buying from you. But yeah, sorry.
In your scenario, the patient, you have two things there. You have a patient mindset.
Yeah.
and you also have an insurance carrier that's in the middle there. So
Yeah.
there's plenty of blame to go around. It's partly the insurance, it's partly the patient, it's partly their marriage, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You're telling them, listen, you have a broken arm, you need to put it in a cast.
Yeah.
And they want you to just put some Scotch tape on it,
Yeah.
And
yeah.
It's uncertain really where that lies. And I think the more you talk the talk, walk the walk, you're going to have patients that really understand that and then appreciate it and value it. And you're going to have some that are not. They just want, I just want to go in.
Yeah.
I want to be here 10 minutes. And I want to walk out with a filling, and I don't want to pay any money.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess, what you're saying is like to be able to provide that full set of care that you actually want to, or you're not necessarily concerned what insurance is covering. I mean, we still submit the claims and all for anything, for things we're at a network with, try and facilitate the process as much as possible. But it does change, help to change your mindset of how you're presenting the case, how you're presenting the information to the patient. Like for perio, I always talk about it, how, this is the foundation to our house. We can't worry about painting the walls before we fix the crack in the basement. And so we need to have that solid foundation. We got to clean up that perio before worrying about, they want that crown, that aesthetic thing, or whitening or whatever. I'm like, I can't start on these other things until we fix that foundation of the house. Then we can talk about building an addition, remodeling the bathroom, however you want to kind of phrase it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really the right priorities, right? You're not putting somebody into a partial denture unless you restored their teeth. I mean, that's a simple one, right?
Yeah. I had that exact conversation, I think last week. They just want me to throw a denture in there. I'm like, I can't do this. Cause you want a result at the end. You don't want just a denture. You want to be able to chew and smile. And, that's what I should be able to provide for you, but we have to follow a process to get there. There's a destination. Let's walk that road to get there together.
I also think, though, it's your responsibility. Like, you can't abdicate certain things, right? So, in other words, you can't say, well, listen, the patient said they wanted a partial, I made them a partial. Then when they lost a tooth and you add a tooth and you add a tooth, and the insurance company says, we're not paying for these things. And you can't go and say, listen, well, the patient wanted the partial first. Because the answer is you, as the caregiver, should know that's not the proper sequence. Right? You can't just say, like x-rays, same thing. You can't say, well, the patient said, I'm not allowing you to take x-rays, so I'm working without x-rays. So it's like, what do you want from me? Instead of saying,
do you want us to work blind?
This is our responsibility. We can't really put that off onto the patient or the insurance company.
Yeah. I mean, the patient's not going to have, obviously, our level of education, or expertise.
Expertation.
In the insurance company. Expertation. Yeah, I add that. We can add that to the dictionary next year. But what was I going to say? But yeah, they don't have the right expertation. And so, when they're looking at things, they probably look up YouTube videos and get a basic idea of things. But if I'm going to build a bridge, I know the basics of concrete, I've poured some stuff before. I fixed a mailbox. I had to make a base for it. But I'm not going to know how to make a smooth floor or water drainage, and the same kind of things with, the health of their perio, the bacteria levels in the mouth, how acids, their diet are affecting things, clenchings, bruxism, that's our job. That's why we went to school forever, to know these things. And we shouldn't expect patients to understand that. And they're going to, respond to things, or, they're going to react to a way that based on what they know and what they understand. And some of it has to be a certain amount of trust in us. And if they don't have that trust, that is a hard, bridge to cross, where if doc says I need a bridge, I guess I need a bridge. And some patients are just fine with that. And some of them, I remember one had an open margin, and they're like, well, can't you just squirt a little cement? I can see the little edge on the x-ray. I'm like, well, no, I know there's a problem underneath the crown. I know you can't see it on the x-ray. I look at these all day, my eyes. I mean, I even remember back in dental school, they're like, oh, there's a cavity here. I'm like, really? And then now you look at x-ray, it's like, bam, 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 bam. Your brain's attuned to it to look for certain things. But I mean, the patient's just not. And I sometimes talk with them, I found out what the patient does. And if maybe they're, I don't know, OSHA regulator or digital marketing or something like that. I mean, I know OSHA what I need to know for the office, but one patient was an OSHA regulator for a factory nearby. And I'm like, I don't know anything about your job. I can't give any recommendations. I don't want to tell you how to do your job because you're going to do it better than me. And I hope you let me do the same for you because I think about these things way too much, and I want to provide that information to you.
But what you're saying to me, which I 1,000% believe, you got to meet the patient where they're at, and you got to find what that level is, and you got to speak in their language, right? It's just it's communication 101. So talk to us with writing the book. I know you said you've thought about writing the book. Go into some of your thought processes. I'm sure because you've had plenty of iterations of writing the book. Just go into some of your thinking as you were putting the book together.
So I know I mentioned this a lot on the first podcast, but kind of the foundation for my thought process and a lot of these is the theory of constraints, the book, The Goal, we discussed a little bit,
right?
Which is a collection of essentially looking at your business as a collection of inputs and outputs, and wherever the bottleneck is going to control the capacity of the entire system. So to fix something that's not a bottleneck is just going to be a waste of time, maybe even cost you more in the end. But fixing that bottleneck, is the whole constraint in the system. So let's say you have a packed schedule and you can't get any patients more in, but you want to increase your production. So you spend more on marketing. Well, when patients call, like you're either not going to answer the phone or they'll be scheduled 4 months out. And so that's like an obvious waste, but there's a lot of things, in our office, it could be accounts receivable. Maybe you're billing all these procedures, but you're just not collecting. Maybe your collections policy is too lax. Maybe you're not getting good patient information in. So identifying your individual bottleneck is going to be the key aspect of this. And how that relates to PPOs is I treat insurance adjustment as a marketing expense, marketing/sales, or, kind of like you might think of care credit, that write-off if you utilize that. And so when you're shifting out of a PPO participation, you're really just firing a marketing company. That's all that's happening. You might replace that with a different marketing company, Google ads, Facebook ads. Also, if your schedule's booked out, you can pull in from future appointments, if you have a really good reputation, or adding additional procedures. Let's say you're referring out. One doc did almost no extractions I talked to. Very successful doc, 3 ops, was doing very well for herself, wanted to drop Delta Dental. I think it was 35% of her production. Rest was either out of network or cash. So, she was definitely making a nice transition to going out of network, good reputation in the community, grew up there. But then when I started doing the math, and it's like, if you just keep these surgical extractions in and you keep like 40% of your patients, you're already at like break even. And so, understanding some of these numbers is kind of the foundation of the book, where we're not making emotional decisions, because this is an emotional thing. It's your baby, it's your office, it's your livelihood for your family. People naturally kind of value a risk twice as strongly as a benefit. So, losing $100 hurts twice as much as gaining $100. So my philosophy was,
how about the docs that don't go into the depth to really understand, right? How about a doc, probably a little bit like myself, who's not really buried in the numbers, but is like, it feels like I see a lot more of these patients. It feels like I'm getting a little bit of this. And did you have to kind of say, hey, listen, let's get into the numbers, and kind of a forced discipline? And then all of a sudden when you look at it, you get scared because you're like, oh my God, I'm giving away 30, 40%, something like that. Is that a common thing that you see?
So, I mean, when someone approaches me, they're probably already in position where they're fairly confident that they're in a somewhat safe position to drop a plan. The ones that are more scared is, if it is a bigger plan. But some of the decisions I'm seeing people make, I feel like it is very emotional based. Like we were talking about before the recording, like that feeling of wanting to be busy. And like, if there's holes in the schedule, you get scared, even though you might be making more money. There was a doc in North Carolina reached out to me. This was a little while ago. And husband and wife team, wife was the dentist, husband was the office manager. He's the one who saw some of my posts and asked some questions, and they're in network with everything under the sun. They're booked up for 3-4 months. They can't get anyone in. And so I asked them a question you've asked me before. So when that cash full fee patient calls you and you're booked up for 4 months, what are you saying? And they're saying, oh, we put them on a wait list, blah, blah, blah. And so like the other one that you're getting 50 cents or 40 cents on the dollar. And that's not an exaggeration. And that's not just Medicaid, by the way. I've seen PPOs that pay worse than Medicaid.
Sure.
And like, that's, so some people I feel like get a little judgy about that, but like if you're in network with some of these PPOs, they pay atrociously bad. And Medicaid actually has some less headaches than regular insurance. You don't have the copays and some other stuff. But yeah, he wanted to, his wife was making good money. Wife was overworked, not spending time with the kids. Just not a good work-life balance. And so, he wanted to talk about shifting. And then, but like, even after all the recommendations and I broke down the numbers, they're like, we're still just going to hire an associate and give them 35%. I'm like, I don't know if you're even going to make a profit, because if you're writing off this plus 35% to the associate plus your regular overhead, I'm like, I think with the chunk of these, depending on what the procedures are doing, like, you're not going to be coming ahead. Where a much simpler and easier option would just be evaluate your patient base. Almost look at it. I don't want to make it too cold with this, but like a stock portfolio where you're looking at the yield of different stocks, and then see like, okay, this stock is making me 2% a year, and this stock is making me 10% a year. Let's sell off this 2% stock and get more of that 10% stock. And you can kind of look at the insurance participation in a similar way. It's like, I'm going to drop this 55% write-off and then, attract some cash patients, but also these other PPOs that are doing like a 20 or 30% write-off. But I just say, but I've seen some other docs too that jump way ahead, way before they're ready. Cigna, I remember hearing when they dropped their fee schedule, I think it was 3-4 years ago, a bunch of docs just dropped them. And I'm sure a lot of docs, that was a great decision, but other ones, if they don't know their numbers, they don't plan ahead with it, they could have been jumping back in and it could have cost them a lot of patience, a lot of money, a lot of unneeded stress and anxiety if you just, plan ahead. I mean, we do treatment plans for patients. You got a perio probe. I see this the kind of thing. I want to check your office occlusion. I want to check your office perio probing. I want to check your office cavity risk, essentially, before I, would make a recommendation. And that's how I kind of try and create what I discuss.
Okay, so let's go into some of your samples now, or what we talked about.
Okay, sure.
So now we're going to go to folks just listening. We're going to go to a share screen on the video version, and Ben's going to put up some real live information here, and I'll let you run with it as soon as it comes up. Yep.
Okay. Can you see that, Sonny? Okay. Yep. So what this was, and if you're part of the fee-for-service group, you probably saw my post initially, is I reached out to some docs because I wanted to have some real numbers. I know my numbers really well, but different scenarios, different problems, different areas of the country, different procedure mixes. So I had them, provide their data to me, and I provided a report somewhat similar to this. It was custom for each situation. No money changed hands. And, on my side or their side, and, they just provide their information, and I did analysis for them and gave my guidance and recommendations. So this is kind of like an average between them. I had docs who were in network with like everything under the sun with zero marketing budget. Other ones more like this one. This is an example in network with 4 major plans. And then some docs who are only in network maybe with 1 or 2. And then, so obviously recommendations are a little different for each scenario.
Okay, so our
so my goal
in network with 4 plans. Okay.
Yeah, 4 plans, and you'll see a pie chart later on. They'll give you a good breakdown of all that. But I felt like that was somewhat of an average between the 2 extremes, so it'd be more useful to your viewers or listeners. So what I try to identify with these custom drop reports is I want to know which plans pay you how many cents on the dollar. And so we can identify which plan, dollar for dollar, is paying you less for your production. So I don't just look at a blanket insurance adjustment, because if you look at that, you're probably going to say, oh, Delta Dental's my worst plan because, I'm adjusting the most. Well, maybe they're 50% of your production, and that's really why you're seeing that, high adjustment number, where some other plan is only 10% of your production, but they're paying you much less. So I always like to have it's based on the fee schedules and your full fee, how I do that, and your top 20 most productive codes. I look at a worst case scenario. So if we dropped a plan, you lost them 100%, what would be your monthly loss in revenue? Obviously that's probably not going to happen, but I like to have it in there.
Let me what's the likely risk? Let me interrupt you for 1 second. I want to highlight what you just said, because I think some people might have missed it. The top 20, what you're looking at, not just straight percentages, you're looking at it in actual numbers reality to the office in terms of their top 20 procedures. So if you're a heavy restorative practice, boom. If you're a heavy preventive hygiene perio practice, boom. They could be completely different things. Like if you're giving away, let's say you're giving away 75% on your crowns and you're not doing a lot of crown and bridge, it may not be as relative as what's happening in your restorative fillings and your preventive care. So I think that was a huge point. I just wanted to emphasize that. Keep going.
Yeah. And I was kind of surprised. And part of this helps me too, because I can evaluate. It's like, oh, how do I want to change my procedure mix? Like for me, I see from a kid, so I'm getting pulp and crowns and space maintainers in the mix. That was in my top 20 codes. Right. The one doc I mentioned earlier, extractions, even simple extractions were not in her top 20 procedures. She was a lot more bread and butter. I don't think she did endo either, but just crown and bridge fillings, and then regular hygiene and scaling and stuff.
Sure.
And so, yeah, it was very different then. And it's also good to see, like, if I can see profitability, it's like, oh, this office that's doing heavy on implants, it might be just as profitable as this one heavy on crowns. It's just a different business model and how you present, treatment and what your skill set is. So I don't think there should be one box for everyone. You don't have to have an exact ratio, 10% bridge, 20% dentures or whatever. I don't believe in that. That doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. But
yeah. I based on your top 20 codes, which is I can pull production numbers and stuff to evaluate that. Yep. The worst case scenario, the likely risk, and we'll get into that a little later, and then how to mitigate this risk. Because my main goal is to be 110,000% sure you're going to make money on this decision. But I want you to overshoot that. So you're at a break even point, so you're doing well above that. But I do kind of go on it as a risk mitigation strategy is my philosophy, to make sure we're doing everything we can to prevent this from being a negative, which is going to end us making it being a net positive for you financially as you drop out of these plans. And I mentioned this to you, Sonny. You posted this quote, I think after that first podcast interview. And I do appreciate your little inspirational things. I look forward to those. I see them in my Facebook feed in the mornings. But I thought this was really appropriate for dropping out of PPOs. And it's a bird sitting on a tree is never afraid of the branch breaking because it trusts is not in the branch, but in its own wings. And so, dropping off these insurance plans, you could think of that as almost a support for your office. If you were to remove that, I want to make sure you can soar and do fine, and not just be plummeting to the ground like a baby bird, that we've done enough strengthening and conditioning of your office that when you do that, you can just fly to the next branch or, just fly to wherever you want to be.
That's why.
So for
that's
this
why
example,
that's why I think you can't be 100% sure. You have to go back to your trust in your ability to do certain things. I do think that at a certain point, initially probably yes, when you're dropping some of the lower hanging fruit. But I think as time goes on, if your mindset is this is where we're going, then I think there's going to be some more down the road. But you should also have a bunch of victories in your back pocket that help you believe in your systems, your office, your practice, and your mindset. So keep going, Ben.
Yeah, and just to kind of attest to that, as I've shifted out of insurance plans, you'll see you have those patients that leave. Sometimes they're glad that they left. They were the more difficult ones, and then some of them leave that might surprise you, and then other ones they go someplace else and come back, which is kind of I think the most rewarding thing of this is because they've seen what else is out there, and then they're choosing, knowing that you're more expensive. They're kind of, you really know that they're identifying the value in you. If they've gone somewhere, weren't as satisfied, and then they want to come back. And so you will experience that as well. But I don't want to. I like to be so numbers focused because I don't want this to be an abstract. I feel like this is the right thing to do. I want to have, a lot more confidence in my decision because, like I said, this is how I support my family. Right. And, I have to make sure it works. I can't just not make money for a year or something because of a decision I made. But anyways, so for this example office, just assuming it's a 4-op bread and butter office, generates about $83,000 a year in production, not collections, which ends up being $1 million a year. The write-offs, which I'll go through some of this math in a second, is about $17,000, and then collections are $66,000 a month. Overhead is 65% of that $66,000, which puts it just under $43,000. And so this doc is taking home $23,000 a month, or $277 a year. So they're certainly not doing bad. Doing pretty well.
But let's use exactly what you said. So in this situation, this office is at a 35% profit margin based on these numbers. If you bring in an associate and you pay him 35%, you're going to lose money because your overhead is going to go up. Yeah. So it's just funny that number came out. So again, folks, let me summarize it. Basically, talking about doing $1 million worth of work over the course of a year. But after you've taken all the write-offs, you're down to about $800,000 a year, right? And the overhead now amounts to 514. So it's about a 65% overhead. So it's nothing to sneeze at. This particular practice is still financially solvent. The doc's taking home $280,000 a year, but they are giving back to uncollected amounts because of insurance. The better part of $210,000, right? So, okay, keep going.
And you'll see with these write-offs, this isn't like an extreme example at all. This is like a very moderate scenario.
Yeah,
I was thinking like, I'll go more extreme. Yeah, I tried to just make it a very reasonable, middle of the road kind of example. And then for marketing,
I think if you were to talk to a doc, listen, if you signed up for this, would you sign up? Would you be happy with this? I guarantee there's a lot of docs going to be very happy with that. So,
and some of that, if that's their choice. But like I said, if given this scenario, which we'll go into more details, like this particular example, there's clearly a better way. So marketing for this office, I consider PPO participation a marketing expense. So I include that in here. They had a website, some Google PPC, so that's your pay-per-click ads, some Instagram and Facebook posting, but no ads. Good visibility and signage from a busy street. I consider that marketing as well, just, even though you're not like paying for that each month. And then the doctor grew up in the local community, active in different organizations, sports, church, religious, and other charities. And so they do have some connection with the local community. You can consider that something similar to ground marketing, for additional word of mouth. And I didn't put it in here, but we can assume this office has been there, let's say 8 to 10 years. So they're, somewhat established in the community, not just the doctor themselves, but the actual office, they're somewhat known. Procedure mix. So other than the bread and butter, regular partial dentures, regular dentures, complete dentures and crown and bridge work and fillings, limited surgical extractions, no bone grafting at all, not even socket preservation. Some anterior and premolar endo. This was actually fairly selective, though. It had to be super easy. Some clear aligner therapy, like Invisalign or something, restores implants but doesn't place them, and no sedation other than nitrous oxide. So I'd say just again, a very bread and butter office, but this shows some opportunities to bring in some of these other procedures for if you're concerned about losing production from dropping out of a plan, these other procedures can help to fill in those gaps, if you were to lose a certain percentage of patients. Schedule. So the doctor's booked out for about 2 weeks. Hygiene's booked out for 12 weeks, so 3 months. They're not pre-blocking for larger cases of doctor time. There's no pre-blocking for new patients and emergency patients. Patients are told if they cannot get in quickly to call another office, which I've heard that more often than I would think, that the office, not just like they're letting it happen, but like they're telling their team just like, oh, tell them to call a different office. We're busy anyways. I was like, well, why aren't we pre-booking, for these opportunities? But that came up more than I thought it would. And this doctor tends to run behind, finish late, even though there's downtime throughout the day. So this particular doctor had a lot of stop and go where kind of the schedule was not planned out in a way to evaluate where all the resources were needed, like doctor time. So this doctor would be double booked, and then other times just be twiddling their thumbs. And then because of that, they would get behind, because obviously you can't be two places at once. I've tried that, and it just doesn't work out too well. This doctor's goals, they wanted to be home. They had kids 8 and 10. They wanted to be home for their kids' sporting events, help to drive them to their practice and whatnot, and be involved in that. Want to maintain their current take-home pay. If they work less hours, that would be a plus, but not really necessary, or if they cut down on days as well. But they're fine with working. And this one I didn't say at the beginning was 4.5 days a week for when they're actually seeing patients. So Monday through Thursday plus half day on Friday. And the doctor is very worried about seeing a decrease in take-home pay and does not want to cut back on their lifestyle. And the doctor does not want to add more staff operatories, increase their production capacity. So they don't want to add any more rooms. They don't want to add a second location. They don't want to, and then, this one, it also wouldn't be practical. It would be a huge investment for them to increase their rooms, where when we get down for their insurance participation, it's actually a much cheaper and easier option than trying to expand your capacity.
They want to work smarter, not harder.
Yeah. And then, like I said earlier, this doc was in 4 of the major PPOs. I just named them PPO 1, 2, 3, 4 because I don't want to get in trouble with the insurance companies. But these were based off of like some of the big names. I'll just say that much. And this doctor wasn't very sure how much each plan represented, in productions, collection, and all that. So, I can't talk to you guys without having my pretty graphs. Sorry, you were saying?
No, that was my earlier point. Sometimes they don't know the depth of some of these things. So keep going.
Yeah. So this graph in the upper left is what we talked about initially, where I look at your top 20 most productive codes and your full fee schedule. And this number represents how much you're collecting for every dollar you're producing. So for your full fee, obviously it's a 1. You're getting our full fee. This one, their worst PPO is getting 55 cents on the dollar. PPOs 2 and 3 is 66 and 65 cents on the dollar, and PPO 4 is 80 cents on the dollar. So all of them you're writing off quite a bit. 20% still a lot, but obviously I'd rather be writing off 20% compared to 45%. And then the upper right, we have our insurance production, so raw production, not collections percentage. And you can see with the PPO 1, it's a little bigger than the other ones at 18%. 2 and 3 are at 15%, and PPO 4 is at 12%. And then our full fee out-of-network patients is 40% of the practice of just raw production, not collections. If I multiply these two numbers together, we get something I like to call an impact score. And so that gives you kind of a weighted ratio of how much each of these plans are affecting your collections. So obviously you're paying, something has a higher percentage production, but paying you less, it's going to draw in less money. Or if something's a smaller portion of your production, but paying you more, then obviously it's going to equal more revenue in the end. And then those numbers can be converted into your impact percentage, which is a lot more useful. And this looks at a weighted average of all your different insurance plans and your out-of-network patients to see how much revenue they represent. And if you notice here, I want to make this example where if you notice, they all represent around 12% of your collections, all your PPOs. One of them represents 18% of production. The other one represents, on the low end, 12% of production. But if I was to drop all these plans, it still all has the same financial risk of revenue. But obviously, if I drop out that PPO at 1, that's actually more patients that can be converted to full fee. And also that could be more opportunities by opening up things in my schedule to pull other patients into those spots or get in those emergency or new patients. Something I do also want to point out with this is the full fee was 40% of our production, but it's 50% of our collections. And so 40% of the work we're doing is equal to slightly over half the money we're bringing in, where the 60% of the work we're doing, represents the same, roughly 50% of the money we're bringing in. Is that all making sense, Sonny?
It is. It is. I think it's interesting that the way it's laid out, if you're not looking at this, obviously there's a difference between a 55% of your fee and 80% of your fee. But then because you have more people in the 55% payment range and less in the 80% range, it's now balanced down. So it's not a clear cut, which is the low hanging fruit. Which a lot of times it is, but it's not as simple in this scenario. So keep going.
Well, I don't know if I'd fully agree with that. So definitely on the risk to the office is equal to all of them, but the PPO one with the 45% write-off, I would call in this scenario definitely the low hanging fruit. Maybe not super low, but definitely the best opportunity for something to drop, because you don't want to drop, let's say, that 80% write-off one and then attract more of these other lower paying insurance plans. We want to, shift into higher and higher fee schedules if at all possible.
Well, I think that's an important point that another friend of mine has made. Be careful when you start to drop one plan or another plan that you don't start putting other plans into those spaces that now are open.
Yeah.
Because you end up shooting yourself in the foot by bringing in the less reimbursement one. So, okay. I agree with you on this 100%. So let's keep going.
Okay. So this just, is going to be kind of the baseline for some of our future, discussions and all that throughout this process. So what I create when I look to drop a plan is our weighted collections ratio. So if we looked at all those other percentages and how much we're collecting for each one, if we weight the different amounts of production with each of them, our current situation, we're keeping around 79 cents on the dollar if you look at all of them. If we were to drop that first PPO and lost 100% of those patients, we would bring up to an 84.5%. So if we're still producing that 83,333, that $1 million in annual production a year, our new monthly production would go up to over $70,000, which would be an increase of $4,416 a month, or $52,000, or just under $53,000 a year. So just dropping this one plan, if we can mitigate other loss of patients, so we're getting just not 100% cash patients, getting the same kind of ratio from the other PPOs plus your current cash patients, we're looking at bringing an extra $52,000 or $53,000 a year without really changing what we're doing in this particular.
And you're still saying in this scenario, you're still saying you lose 100% of those patients. You're not even accounting for a certain percent sticking around.
Well, no. So this one is assuming we'll go to those other scenarios in a second. This is assuming you drop out of that other insurance plan and then you replace those patients with the remaining mix of your current patients. So this is, a little bit of like, this is an absolute best case scenario, but this is, a good, more kind of ideal scenario. Sure. And I'll talk about ways to mitigate with this, but this isn't without increasing production at all. You're just getting paid more for what you're doing. And also remember, this increase in revenue, your overhead shouldn't be increasing at all. And so this is, just going to you or your team or your CE or, wherever you want to put that.
Well, simple math says, right, you went from 79 to 85. You went up 5%. So 5% of $1 million is $50,000.
Yeah, and that's basically where that comes from. But I like to point out, whenever I do my calculations, I'm not assuming all of these patients are converting to full cash. I mean, unless you're dropping your last PPO, then that's different. I just assume you're getting whatever you've always been getting.
Sure.
And so I think that's the most fair and balanced way to do it. Sure. I mean, you do run the risk of just replacing them all with a different PPO, which, if it's paying you better, that's not great, but that's better than you're at. And you can, progressively just, keep dropping off the lowest. So in this particular example, so this is a break even without replacement. So that means you don't have patients coming in to replace this gap. You would need to keep just 55% of these patients from this plan to break even. So slightly more than half, which I think that when I gave this kind of number to people, it really surprised them how low they had to keep with some of these plans to just hit their break even. Because obviously all the ones that are you're retaining, you're getting full fee for. And then if you lose 50%, so half, we're looking at $633. I go through some different numbers here. Worst case scenario, you're losing just under $7,000 a month. So that would be if you lost all your patients, you couldn't fill in that gap with anything else. you just had a bunch of holes in the schedule, you would lose, $7,000 a month. So that is like your absolute worst case scenario, given this particular situation. And then moving forward, I'm going to actually use some examples looking at this 30% retention rate, which I would call pretty low. And this example, you would lose around $3,100 in revenue each month if you only kept 30% of the patients. So obviously 70, went someplace else. So if we only have 30% retention, we have that weighted average of 0.845 that we mentioned before, that 85% you said. We can use that number to figure out how much revenue or production we have to replace to mitigate this loss. And so, because you have to, if you're producing one number and collecting another number, you have to produce a little more. So for this ends up being 3,750. And so the question now is not how do I keep 100% of these patients? If I'm assuming only 30% retention, which is low, really low, kind of not a worst case, but a very bad case scenario, how can I replace this revenue? What procedures can I add in? What additional marketing can I do to replace this? And that, that's what we'll go through in a second. So if we look at this example, adding a surgical extraction for our full fee is going to be $380. So if I add in 9.87 surgical extractions, we're taking care of that. If our clear aligner fee is at $4,500, I just need 0.83 units of clear aligners a month. So not even a full new case a month. If we're adding in that molar endo, we just need to do an additional 3.32 units of molar endo a month. So these aren't like massive amounts of extra production you're trying to work in. So, even if you take some courses and you're just kind of adding some more of these procedures in, not doing every most difficult surgical extraction or every crazy molar endo with a J-shaped root and calcified canals, like just the bread and butter ones. You don't need to replace that with a whole lot. And I like to focus on things that you're referring out initially because you know how many of those cases are coming through your door. And so if you're referring out 10 cases a month of endo, and let's say you can keep 5 of them in-house after increasing your training, well then okay, I'm even with our worst case scenario, we're replacing our production easily in that scenario. So, and then there's also things like if you're looking to add sleep apnea, Botox, all these other things, those can be great, but there's a lot more uncertainty with that because you would have to learn what kind of marketing attracts those patients, how to present those cases, if you need to start getting before and afters. So I do like to initially focus on things that we're currently referring out, because then we can look at your current procedure mix and see, what would be an easy thing to keep in-house. So for this particular doctor, I recommended some additional CE for surgical extractions. I'm still referring out a lot of third molars in anxious patients to try and get more clear aligners, get more photos before and afters for their future marketing, because that'll take some time to build up. This particular doctor was not interested in learning any more about molar endo or for implants at all. And so I figured it was better to focus on procedures they wanted to learn, and they're also referring out. So it just kind of made sense on a financial level as well. For scheduling, definitely start pre-blocking, and that time needs to be sacred. The team cannot just fill that in to allow for more new patients, those emergency patients, and longer blocks of doctor time, like a 2 or 3 hour block of time for, a larger crown and bridge case. Or if you're doing, let's say, an endo, core, and crown all back to back, or multiple procedures at once. Implement something I talk about in the book called the hybrid scheduling method. And you create these times tables. So they're little tables that show when the doctor is needed for each appointment. So the scheduler knows when to position and stagger appointments. So the doctor's kind of moving evenly throughout the day, even though you will see some gaps in the schedule. But if you look at where the doctor's actually being utilized, because he was the bottleneck in this example, that he's just moving consistently throughout the day instead of trying to rush and then wait throughout the day. He'd rather just have him kind of at a steady jog than doing a bunch of sprints. For marketing, increase their PPC budget. Like I said, insurance expense I do feel as a marketing expense. And so by replacing this with, paid Google ads, to mitigate that loss of patients, we can kind of replace that as well. More targeted marketing, using Facebook and Instagram for their ideal audience for that procedure. I feel like Google's particularly good for emergency procedures because people are going to just say, broken tooth, dentist near me. And so that's, if you're trying to get surgical extractions or, cracked teeth for future crowns, that's been really easy, a good option, very cost effective. And then start also bringing out clear aligners for all your patients that might be at least somewhat interested in it. Not be over aggressive or salesy in it, but just make sure they're aware that you offer this. Because this office, a lot of the patients didn't realize it was an option, and they're actually going to other places to get this done. Some of them, from Bite or those online sources, and we're not getting the best results, where they would have been happy if this doctor did it, but they just didn't bring it up. And then for dropping plans, so we want to have a target drop for this one and a 6-month time frame. So we're going to start talking to patients for 3 months, and start sending out letters. And then when you do go to drop a plan, it's not necessarily a fast process. Insurance company is going to hem and haw. It's going to be hard to talk to the right people. I find it's better if the doctor calls instead of a team member. You kind of cut through the bureaucracy a bit faster. And then they'll put it between a 90 or 120 day waiting period before you actually be at the network. So that's why you want to notify them, a good 3 months before you actually plan on being at a network. So that way you can, have all the paperwork lined up. You wouldn't want to wait till 6 months and then, try and drop it then, because then you're adding an extra 3 months to this process unnecessarily. Sometimes you'll get counter offers from insurance companies. So, if you go to drop a plan and they have multiple tiers, so PPO and Premier, Cigna's got at least 2 tiers. Anthem, I think, has 3, that they might start pushing for you to drop out the lower tier and keep the higher tier. This makes a lot of confusion for your patients. I would only really recommend this if it's a really big plan. So for most people, that's going to be your Delta Dental going from PPO to Premier. But if you're all these other plans, patients are going to be really confused. You're going to get bad reviews, and your fee schedule is going to go up just slightly. So if you're ready to drop, most of the times I just say drop. Don't start dropping out of these lower versions of these plans, because it just makes it really confusing. Also, when you go to drop, sometimes the insurance companies will offer you a better fee schedule. Make sure if it is that it has to be a bigger increase than your other PPOs. In that case, you could consider dropping out of one of these other PPOs, but keeping this one at a better fee schedule. Still long term, you're going to be looking to drop it, but it could make sense to drop that one, one of the other ones in the short term. If it's not that much of an increase, just drop that PPO that you planned on dropping, and then kind of just move ahead. And then long-term plan for this office is drop the plan and kind of wait for the dust to settle, see how the schedule pans out. And then, if the schedule's still looking pretty good, reevaluate for the next one to drop, a few months from now, if you're not seeing a bunch of holes in the schedule. So that's it for this. This is based on a handful of docs that reached out to me from the fee-for-service group, kind of to give a kind of common scenario I saw. Other docs that were, sorry.
My suggestion would be, though, if you're committed to doing it, and this is where you have that mindset, go back to being committed to doing it. I think, let's say you take this scenario, you decide January, listen, we're going to get out of network, so you're going to try to get out by July. My thought would be, while you're doing that, if in this scenario, they got 4 plans, right? And the impact, in terms of your impact score, was similar. So it's not really like an easy, obvious pick this one. So I think once you're settled into the thought process and you have that mindset, I'm not going back, I'm burning the boats. I think you pick a schedule and you say, okay, this is in this section, and then in the next 12 months we're going to do this one, so that over the course of 2 to 3 years max, you're completely free, because you don't want to hem and haw and be wishy-washy overall, I think, for what you want to do. So if that's your intention, that's your plan, I think you carry it out. And I don't think you'll have any regrets from the people that I've spoken to and the people who've done it. And it does. You get confidence. You get that feeling of, we're doing the best things for our patients. And now you're conveying that message to your patient. It's not the money. We're doing what's best for you. and you can clearly start
Yeah.
to explain it. That goes a long way because they trust you ultimately.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Some of these things I brought in, it's because I got certain pushback or questions from other docs, that are going through the process. They still have that fear and anxiety. So like the fee negotiation thing or that partial drop thing, I've seen a lot of docs do those partial drops, and then they have this huge mess of insurance plans, and even their front can't say what they're in network or out of network with because we're in this like specific version of Cigna or MetLife. Or he dropped out of the federal plans but kept the PPO, and the patients don't know what they have. And some of the plan, I had a MetLife patient who was very mad. We were at the time still networked with the PPO, and they had a weird federal plan, and everything looked fine on the plan. But until we got an EOB back, we didn't realize we're actually at a network with this federal plan. But for a network with MetLife, it's very cut and dry, and we can be very upfront with patients. Their patients don't feel like we're trying to bait and switch them, saying we're in network and we're not. It's just clear we're out. And kind of to what you're saying, having a schedule with that. I had one of my assistants ask, when are we going to drop another plan? When are we drop another plan? Because they're kind of excited to see the progress and seeing us be like more exclusive and stuff like that. And I do like to say, like, I let the schedule tell me what to do. And so as we drop the plan, because if we see a bunch of holes in the schedule and then we have a lot of fear and it kind of traps us, if I see holes in the schedule, my first thought is not to add an extra PPO back in. It's okay. What internal marketing can we do? Can we just reach out to patients who need procedures like that we couldn't see beforehand because we're overbooked and just fill in those holes, like overdue recalls? Or what additional marketing can we do? Or what procedures can I add in? And use those as my replacement methods, not a discount.
How about just learning better skill sets? Where in the past, maybe you're not bringing patients up or working on a call list. You're just used to people just filling in because they're coming from the insurance companies. So you never had to do that. So now your team has to learn different skill sets. Oh, someone's open today. It's 2:00 on Wednesday. Who's coming in next week at 2:00 Wednesday? Let's see if they want to come this week. Or just some of those skills. And then when you're scheduling with a thought in mind, how can we shape our schedule going forward? So I think that's another component here that may be downplayed,
Yeah. So like I said, there's some good graphs for it in the book, but a method I call the hybrid scheduling method, which is a combination of, it's a hybrid because it's 3 different systems I merged together. We have block scheduling, which I think most people have heard about. Your pre-blocking time, your primary, secondary, tertiary. If you've heard like rock, boulder, sand, those examples, where you want to put in those more high value patients first, and then those smaller ones, because those high value patients are usually long stretches of time, particularly long stretches of doctor time. And if you only have 30 minutes here or there, you're not going to do a 4-unit crown and bridge case. Like you can't cut that up into 4 30-minute slots. So if you pre-block that time and treat it as sacred, which is another thing that surprised me, how many people would pre-block and their front desk would just delete it, and nothing would happen. So some of it is like a management thing. Like, are you being firm and consistent with your team? If it's 2 days away and your pre-blocks aren't full, fine, put them in with whatever. And then I create something I like to call a times table, which is a little table for each procedure for how much chair time you need. And then it marks when the doctor's actually needed. So that way your front desk knows, like, oh, if I'm cementing a crown, it might be 30 minutes, but the doctor's only needed for 5-10 minutes in the middle. Or, let's say I'm doing crown and bridge. The assistant's going to scan. The assistant's going to take the impressions. The assistant's going to take the shade and apply topical. The doctor's not in there for the very beginning of that procedure. So the doctor can be doing something else. But if you try and put, 2 crowns right at 8:00, you're going to have someone being mad. But if you have them, let's say you give an hour and a half for a crown and bridge case, and the second one comes in at 8:45, 9:00. So you're finishing up that one, assistant's making the temp or whatever, and dismissing the patient. And then you have another assistant, but like you will see holes or gaps in the schedule, but you're really not, because the schedule in this one is being constrained by the doctor, and where their time is at. You'll see like an endodontist might have 1 or 2 chairs because they have to be in the room for all their procedures, or for general dentists with more hygiene, or if you're just doing simple fillings, you can pop in and out kind of quick. And so kind of optimizing some of your schedule and some of these systems based on, like I said, the theory constraints, because another factor, which is the theory constraints aspect of it, is how much treatment plans you're generating versus how much you're consuming. So I've seen docs go into like a feast and famine cycle where they panic, they do all this marketing to try and get the schedule full, they get booked up, they ease up on the gas and like recalling patients to come in, and then all of a sudden they've ran through a bunch of their treatment plans, but they've not been focusing on generating new ones. And so by figuring out how much treatment plan you're generating that's likely to be done, I call that an acceptable treatment plan, not accepted, but acceptable. Not your full treatment plan, because some people just aren't going to do things or not afford to, or it's going to be spread out. But so that way you're kind of at like more of an even keel and not feast and famine as much by looking at how much treatment plans you're generating and what you're doing to generate those things, and do those even when you're kind of busy. So that way you don't have those lulls laid on. Always keep a little bit of pressure on your schedule to, be filling it. So if something bad does happen, a bunch of patients get sick, you've got other ones to just shuffle in there.
Folks, get Ben's book. By the time this podcast is released, it will be out on Amazon. The Dropping Dental PPO Playbook. Okay? And as you know, you heard Ben speak, it's well thought out. It's strategic, and it is solid fundamentals behind it. So again, Ben, I want to thank you. That. This was great stuff. We have, you really gave a really good flavor of the book. And anybody that's heard you speak or follows some of the things that you're doing knows, your breadth of knowledge is tremendous. So I want to thank you for coming on. Appreciate you very much. Thanks.
If I could, can I just mention one quick thing before we get off? The book is meant to be comprehensive for you to start your dropping PPO process. There is a link in the back that if you do want to have me look at your situation and do an analysis and give recommendations on your specific situation, that is a service I will be offering. That's all kept private. It's very just one-on-one and confidential. But the book is meant that you can really get started on your own without having to have me directly involved. But yeah, there's a link and additional information in the back of the book if you're interested in that.
Yes, I knew that you were doing that, so that's a great service, folks. I know people that have benefited from this, and Ben is the right person to talk to. So, and you could tell it's a hands-on, hands-on experience. So, thank you.
All right. Today's I enjoyed being on.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I just said I enjoyed being on. It's always great talking to you. I look forward to us talking again sometime in the future.
You got it. Thanks, Ben.